Welcome to the first of our Together Again interviews, reuniting some of the cast and crew members from Blake 7. Joining us today are Gareth Thomas and Paul Darrow. This is the first time that these two gentlemen, and I use that term guardedly, of course, have been interviewed together in over 15 years. Also with us is Sheelagh Wells, whose brainchild this project is, and also a former makeup designer on Blake 7 as well. Now, the last time the two of you were together in the studios was December 5th, 1981, and as I recall, one of you was in, shall we say, less than perfect physical condition at the time.
You mean I was flat in the back again, as usual? Yes, you shot me, didn't you?
I did. I wanted to shoot you in the back, but they wouldn't let me.
I refused to turn round.
That's right. But you were unarmed, so that was something.
Was I? I can't remember.
No, you were definitely unarmed.
I do remember I had a little thing going down my arm, which I was supposed to press when you pressed the trigger.
Well, that was to keep you going, yes, because you weren't too well at the time.
Well, no, but that was the one in my brain. Now I'm talking about the one in my arm.
Right, which you borrowed from Gann.
From Gann.
Yes. Oleg C. Gann.
David Gann Jackson.
We once left him in a nuclear power station because they put out sandwiches for the crew and the cast, and because it was a nuclear power station, Jan Chappell, who played Callie, was very worried that we would get radiated, so she wouldn't touch the food, and of course it spread around to the entire crew, and as she wouldn't eat it, neither would they. But David would.
Jackson would.
Because he was hungry. So he was eating all the sandwiches and the cakes when we wrapped. So we all ended up back at the hotel, and suddenly we'd showered, shaved, everything. We're in the bar having a drink, and suddenly somebody said, "Where's David?"
He's small and you could miss him.
No, well, we'd left him there, and he'd had to have a lift back to the hotel 3 hours later from one of the employees of the nuclear power station. He wasn't too pleased.
I remember two other things about that place, too. A certain lady sitting not far away from us, if I remember rightly, got a radioactive backside. Do you remember that?
Oh, she sat on this thing saying, "Do not touch."
Do not sit on this. And she properly sat on it and got a radioactive backside. Am I right there, Sheelagh?
That's right. I've forgotten all about it. I did. I sat in...
Well, it'll come back to haunt you.
I'm sure it will. All I remember really is sitting down because I had a very heavy makeup box with me, and I sat down on what appeared to be a perfectly innocent oil drum. And a gentleman slid up behind me and said, "I don't want you to worry about this, madam, but just get your bottom checked on the way out." And I was sent down with all the equipment, all the camera boxes, in this tiny little lift. And when I got to the bottom, the doors opened. There was a tall guy in a very sort of long, loose brown overall with what appeared to be a hot brush in his hand. Now, a hot brush, for those of you who don't know, is something used to curl people's hair. But he asked me to turn round, and then he ran it rather lovingly over my person, declared I was fine, and I was allowed to go. And that apparently was my test. I mean, had I been dangerous, I would have lived in that little basement with that guy for the rest of my life, I suppose. I don't know.
Michael
Probably.
Keating would do anything to touch her up, wouldn't he?
He did frequently, yes. I seem to remember another thing. In the nuclear power station, obviously being a nuclear power station, their security, etc., is fairly hefty. And I seem to remember there had to be an explosion, at which point you and... I can't remember who it was with you. We had to run across this great big empty hall.
Yes, I remember.
And when the explosion went off, as was our special effects man's wont, it was a rather large explosion. It actually picked you off your feet and flew you across the floor. And I have never seen so many white coats come out of corners and crevices and everything.
He cut the film, but if you'd actually continued with the filming, you see me do a roll, come straight up, and use the most appalling language. Like, good heavens, Betsy, what's going on?
It's quite scripture when you stuck to the script.
Yeah, I stuck to the script.
Makes a change.
Oh dear, acidity has crept in at an early date. And all he asked was, it's a long time since we spoke together, now you know why.
Yes. 1981, is it short a time as that?
1981, gosh.
Well.
Yes. I was 12.
And pretty, yes.
Oh.
I was slim and ugly.
Yes, but I shall be sober in the morning.
One of the things about Blake 7, though, as you've sort of alluded to, was that it included some less than glamorous location shooting. Lots of quarries and more quarries. And
yes, we thought of compiling a book, all the chalk quarries and sand pits we visited in southern England. I mean, I don't know why Doctor Who got to Tenerife. We got as far as Worthing, I think, didn't we?
But we had such a good budget, of course.
Swanage.
I mean, they could... Yes.
Swanage.
We got as far as there, yeah. We went up to Yorkshire
I know
once.
about these locations. I mean, if you're a nuclear atom, a nuclear power station is heaven, I would think.
Yes, I suppose if you're, yes, I suppose
I
if
quite
you're
enjoyed some of the locations. We went up to Bamborough, near Holy Island. That was lovely. And that was where they had the lovely white sand, and that was where Via Lorimer, the director, said to Josette Simon, the black lady, that she would show up very well against the white sand, which I thought was very funny. And
well,
so
his
did
legs
she.
didn't, did they? Because he was wearing shorts, wasn't he?
Yeah, he
That
always
is
wore
right,
shorts.
Yes.
And that's where a stuntman had to do a particularly dangerous fall, and about 400 people gathered around to watch. He did the fall, and of course they applauded. So the illustrious sound department said, we'll have to go again.
Oh dear, that was Veer did the stunt, was it?
Veer, no, he didn't do that one. No, that was far too dangerous. No, he said, I want you to do that, and the fellow did it, and then had to do it again. And of course, they used to pay by the
stunt, yes.
number of stunts you did, so he was quite delighted. He got double pay.
Yes, I didn't get. I was always chalk pits and quarries. I never got to Bamborough and
No,
places
you
like that.
didn't. No, Bamborough's a wonderful location. We enjoyed it very much.
It was
didn't
lovely.
we? It was
David
really
Maloney,
nice.
who was the producer at the time, said, well, get rid of Gareth Thomas, then we'll go to some nice places.
Yes, that's the problem. And, you know, I came back and I got shot. Well, I did. No, I did come back with a small furry animal at one point. If you remember that.
Yes, I remember that. Gerbil, wasn't it?
Was it a gerbil? I'm not quite sure.
Gerbil, no.
A cross-eyed teddy or something? I can't
It
remember.
was something remarkably similar to a teddy bear.
That's
Yeah.
rubbish. Don't remember
Yes.
anything about that
Oh.
at all.
No, I had a beard, so you wouldn't recognise me. No.
That is complete false.
I was acting incognito with a beard.
Well, for the 2 or 3 people in the civilized world who don't know the story of the infamous teddy bear,
Well, it was. I was actually at the Royal Shakespeare Company at the time, and I was asked could I come back and do this half day's filming, and it fitted in. And I said yes, all right. It was also filming fairly close to Stratford, so I said, right, what is it? And I said I've got a beard, and they said doesn't matter because nobody's seen you for the last 6 months anyway. And it's a scene with Paul, and I said fine, great. So we came down, we started doing the scene. I was wired up to all sorts of this, that, and the other, lying on a supine on the table. I spent a lot of time on my back, didn't I?
It's a good word, supine, isn't it?
It is, I know, yes, I've used it
I knew
twice
her
now.
well.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, and it came to the scene, and we did the scene, and then it came to Paul's close-up, and I had a quiet word with the director, and I had this little teddy. And so as it came to Paul's close-up, up behind the camera came this little teddy. And being the professional he is, he just wet himself and burst out laughing.
And we've actually got that shot on the blooper
On the blooper
tape, which
tape,
is
yes.
lovely. Yes. We've
I don't
got an
remember
outtake.
any of this at all. I was a professional artist trying to do my work.
Did you notice the word was?
At the time, yes, it's all changed now. Yeah.
So that was Avon's teddy, and it sort of stuck.
you were mentioning before about Veer instructing some of the cast members in stunts. That was something he was quite keen to do on more than one occasion, wasn't it?
Yes.
Showing you how.
He did actually on one occasion, dragging the memory, Cygnus Alpha, I think it was the second episode or third episode. And he did actually hurl himself down a very steep slope at about 1 o'clock in the morning and then turned around and said, that's what I want you to do, Gareth. And I said, oh, thanks, pal. But, I mean, one did it, yes. But he also hurled himself across the floor one day in the rehearsal rooms and said, now, when we go to location, Gareth, that's what I want you to do. And I said, but Veer, the location is a flight of stone steps. Ah, yes. Have you got a stunt man, Geoffrey? You never did your own stunts, did you?
Yes, I did all my own stunts. I was the only one who did all my own
Good
stunts.
Lord.
I was absolutely wonderful at doing my own stunts. Oh, my God, I must have been an idiot. Absolute idiot. I remember we did one.
Something's
There was,
never changed.
do you remember the one where there was some dynamite
Running across the field.
running across a field?
Abingdon.
Abington.
And I got David Gann-Jackson to stand there and catch me, because once they triggered it, it was in a sequence. So it would all go, all the various explosions would go, and there was nothing they could do about it once they triggered it. I was really scared. I don't mind admitting it. I ran like hell. I mean, Sebastian Coe, rubbish. Compared to me, I was across there like lightning. And if you look carefully, you can see David holding his arms open to catch me, which I thought was rather touching.
Yes, I didn't
And then
have
he
that pleasure.
died, didn't he, later on?
Yes, I didn't have that pleasure. I had to go on my own. And the man said to me, the special effects man, Peter Pegram, said, will you run across this field, Gareth? I've got some idea of the speed you're going to go. Because there are 9 explosions. And what I intend to do is let one off every time you go past it. And as Paul says, Sebastian Coe, forget it. I mean, the one thing about Sebastian Coe is you never an explosion go up his arse. I mean, when that
Is he allowed to use that word?
But you double your speed. And I went a lot faster than he'd expected. And he let off the last 3 explosions simultaneously, which did physically pick me up and throw me into the hedge. And the director yelled up, which I think was George Spenton Foster again, yelled out, "Cut! Was that all right for you, Peter?" Peter said, yes, fine. Okay, camera, yes, fine. All right, sound, yes, fine for sound, yeah. Oh, Gareth, are you all right? I thought, well, there you go. There's the order of preference, isn't it? Precedence, not preference, precedence.
Well, both.
Both, thank you.
Yes, they were pretty hairy, some of them. I remember I did one with Glynis Barber, and we had to run across some chalk pit. And the director was a man called Victor Zretelis. And he didn't tell us where the explosions were going to happen. Well, he did, but he didn't tell us all of them. And I was furious because he let one off practically underneath us. And afterwards I got quite cross with him, and he said, "But it's wonderful effect." I said, "Oh, great, but..."
Can you ever replace me?
Quite. Well, apparently they could, yes.
Well,
but Glynis, no.
I think the last, that chalk quarry again, the last episode I filmed. And Peter Pegram and his lads decided to blow up the loo when I was in it, the Portaloo. Unfortunately, it wasn't me in it, it was the dresser.
That's right.
That's right, it was Roy.
Yes, and he came out on his side. Oh, dear.
Yes, it was poor fellow, I remember that.
Actually blew the Portaloo over, yes. That could have been fairly dodgy.
He could have been very nasty, depending on what he was up to.
But it was a fun show, it was a good family fun, good clean family fun.
Yes.
Apart from Michael Keating, but then, good fun of everything.
Panto.
Yes.
When did the two of you actually hear about this project called Blake 7, and how did you actually get involved in it? I know this is sort of peeling back the layer of memory quite a bit.
An elegant sentence.
Yes, quite.
Follow that, really.
Yes, quite. When my agent phoned up and said they wanted you to do it. That's a simple answer to that one. So I said yes. Simple as that.
No, you didn't. You asked for the money first.
Oh, well, it's at BBC, it's always the same. There isn't any money, so there never was.
They asked to see me, and I went along, and David Maloney, who was the producer, looked like a Smurf, I remember. He handed me the scripts, the first 4, which were the only 4
we ever had, yes.
And he said, "You'll like this part, Avon." And I read the first episode, and he wasn't in it, which I didn't think was a very good omen, actually. But then I read the next 3, and it was all right, so we carried on from there. That was okay.
Yes, they're probably the only 4 scripts we ever had before we actually started doing it.
Yes, they were.
I mean,
we actually shot episode 4 first, I seem to remember, so that Jan would not feel left out.
Left out. Yes, it was the first one, because the very first shot of all was you and I standing on a steep chalk slope, talking.
Yes.
And if I remember rightly, it was a waist upward shot, and the ground started giving way beneath you. Being a professional who carried on talking, slowly slipped out of the bottom of the frame.
That's right. And you did nothing at all to help
Absolutely. I just looked down and said, "Go, there you are."
Which sets the tone for the rest of the series.
Good professional fun.
How much control, well, maybe control isn't a good word, but maybe how much influence in your characters did you actually have in the early days? Because there's sort of 2 theories about that. One is that the writer knows the character more than anybody else, and the other, obviously from the actor's perspective, is the actor knows his character better than anybody else.
If I'd had any sort of control at all, he wouldn't be sitting here now.
I think that's a good question, actually, because if you don't mind my saying, from Gareth's point of view, I think his control, for want of a better word, was much less than mine, simply because he was the eponymous hero, and therefore had to go in a certain direction, and it was necessary for the scriptwriters to ensure that he did. Whereas Avon, a peripheral, if you like, character at that particular time, could more or less do what he wanted. And therefore there was a considerable advantage as far as I was concerned, because I could do whatever I wanted to do, and a writer would look at it, and frequently did, and the director or writer would say, "Oh, I like that, we'll let him do that." But the hero, which Gareth played, couldn't do that. I mean, he couldn't really shoot people in the back, he couldn't really hit women or things like that, whereas I could.
Do you know you used a word of 4 syllables then?
Did I?
Yes, eponymous. Can you spell it?
Yes. I-T.
Ah, well done.
But would there be a sort of maybe a running battle during the read-throughs as far as looking at your character in the early days and sort of saying, well, maybe I wouldn't do that, or maybe I would do that?
Oh, yes, in small areas, yes. I mean, I do remember in the first series where it was a little bit more realistic, I think. And I did actually break somebody's neck. I mean, metaphorically speaking, acting-wise. And I asked for the microphone to come down, and I said, "Now, would you overlay that on the sound?" And they did. But come the second series, they wouldn't let us do that. It became too vicious. So I then had to sort of put on my white gear and sort of be the, as Paul says, the eponymous hero.
But do the actors become the sort of quality control engineer for their own character as time goes by? When you have new writers coming in and new directors, a lot of it does fall to you as far as how your character is going to be handled, doesn't it?
To an extent.
Yes.
Yes. I think, yes, you're right. To an extent. I remember in the first series, Gareth, being the eponymous, I'll say it again, hero.
Yes,
we used to have a group of actors at the BBC who I used to call the Welsh Mafia, actors like Philip
Or
Maddock
the Taffy or the Cousin Nostra.
Sean
Yes.
Phillips and so on. And at lunch times, when they went into the pub, I remember, I remember Sean Phillips saying to Gareth once, "Oh, Gareth, you're prostituting your art." And of course, he then had a few drinks and came back and thought she was right and started throwing the script all around saying, "I'm not going to speak this grammar school rubbish," or whatever it was, which I think was a pinch from Tom Baker anyway, whoever he may be. And we had a riot of a time in the afternoon once those people had to go at poor old Gareth because he would change the script and Veer was standing there going, "Oh dear.
Cut it all with some action.
With some action.
Yes.
Throw a bomb in." Is that all right saying that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I had no control at all.
Because Michael Keating always used to say, "Hello, there again."
Yes, a lot of time is spent writing the script. In fact, I still have somewhere a handwritten script. And when we used to go into studio, yes, I still got a
They used to
handwritten
do extraordinary things, like have Jan Callie climbing a bell tower, I remember.
Oh, wow.
And the costume department had put her in 3-inch high heels.
Yeah, well, yes, and I also, that particular climbing that bell tower, I remember that very well because it was very, very late when I got down to the location because we were under a lot of pressure. And I'd had a few jars the night before just to make me sleep apart from anything else. Very early morning start. Geraint Morris was directing that one, I think. Or was it Pennant?
Pennant.
Pennant was directing that one. And I had to actually throw a grappling iron up to the top of this castellated tower thing and climb up it. And I thought to myself, well, just go for it, pal, you know. Well, of course, it was tied off at the top when it was going, and up I go up this rope. Now, if you go up a straight wall with a rope, it actually gets closer and closer to the wall as you get closer and closer to the top and gets more and more difficult. So I got to the top and I yanked out my hand and grabbed hold of one of these castellated tower things, and the entire thing came off in my hand. Luckily, missed everybody down below. And I'm left about 40 foot up, hanging and swinging on a rope with one hand, with a hangover. Oh, I remember that very well.
And they called a tea break.
Yes, that's right. I was up there. And Jan, the stunt girl, had to jump down off the top of it. And very badly hurt her knee. It was supposed to be Jan, but obviously the stunt girl did it. And actually hurt her knee. I remember that. Oh, yes.
You bring up an interesting area as far as costumes, because there are two different things to consider with costumes. One,
trouser splitting is one, yes.
That would be okay. So there are three. I was actually thinking in terms of how a costume will look on camera versus how it actually feels to wear this and do stunts and be on location in these costumes.
Ask Paul. He was wearing the tight leather trousers.
But that was your fault.
I know.
We had this woman who decided that we would go to a firm called Hardcore Leather. Make of that what you will. Castellated is a good word, isn't it?
Yes.
Anyway,
yes.
and she went to Gareth, who of course was the eponymous hero, and said, "Will you wear thigh-length boots and leather?" To which Gareth apparently replied, "Certainly not, but Paul will." So I ended up with this lady going to Hardcore Leather and then rushing around saying, "Can we do your inside leg measurement?" and all that sort of thing, and here's a pair of leather underpants as a present. You've worn leather underpants?
What? No, I haven't. No, I'm
They're
sad to
quite
say.
warm. Anyway, so I had the leather. But of course, the extraordinary thing about leather is that when it's new, it's quite stiff. So if the director would say, "Okay, now you bend down here," every time I bent down, I creaked. And at one particular point, I think you remember, I had to be helped down.
Yes.
So they said, "Right, well, we'll cut to Gareth while they're helping you onto the floor." Eventually it loosened up, of course, so that was all right. So he lumbered me with the leather.
But you still have to be helped down to the floor, though, don't you?
True, but, well, yeah, but for other reasons now. But he was hoisted with his own petard because when we were on location and it was freezing cold, leather is lovely and warm. And he didn't have it.
No. Long johns and some silly, I don't know what else I had on, a dueling shirt or something very cold and miserable.
And I was lovely and warm.
And what about your lovely green leather jacket with the
melon
huge,
thing.
the melon jacket?
The melon sleeves.
That's
yes,
right.
that was a wonderful idea. It was my idea until I started wearing it, and by then it was too late. And the other thing was the colour. I remember going to Anello and David and having my boots made for me, and I said, "Oh, this isn't nice. Interesting colour." The man said, "Yes, goose turd green." I said, thank you. And they pulled out the jacket of the same colour, matching jacket and goose-turd green boots.
I remember those big sleeves. You used to keep the script up there, didn't you?
Yes, yes.
Things like that. And
when we had a
whiskey.
When we had a bottle of whiskey. Always.
Anything there, a packet of cigarettes.
I used to also in those days smoke a pipe, and of course you're not allowed to smoke in studio. So the fireman, I knew most of them. One was actually called Gareth. And the fireman would come up to me knowing, because I was surrounded by smoke, that I was actually smoking. I'd stick it in my pockets, always had pockets in my costume. And they would stand there and talk to me for ages, knowing I had this lit pipe in my pocket, burning both hand and costume. Made a change from whiskey, must admit. Or brandy.
But did you have any sort of influence to be able to say, I can't wear this if we're going on location? Or basically what you got was what you had to wear, and that was it? Basically, yes. But I mean, having said all that, on the whole, I mean, you're not going to be deliberately given a costume you can't be fairly comfortable in, on the whole. I mean, every now and then you do, but basically it's fairly straightforward. Although, having said that, if you've got boots and you have to run, which we had to run around an awful lot, didn't we? It's actually very uncomfortable, especially on wet chalk. That they didn't think of, but then neither did we, so it's partly our fault, I suppose.
But we did have these lovely boots. I've still got mine that are from Anello and David, and they who are wonderful bootmakers, and they make ballet shoes and things as well, don't they? Wonderful boots.
You've still got yours?
I've still got them.
I was at a convention some time ago, and a few years ago, BBC held an auction of costumes from all sorts of hundreds of different shows. And I was at a convention one day signing autographs, and a woman said to me, "Do you recognise this?" And I looked up, and I was looking at my own costume, which she had bought and obviously pared down to fit her. But that was a bit of a strange experience. The whole costume, I think it was Laurie Cohen.
Well, Michael Keating sold his boots for charity.
Nobody bought them.
And nobody bought them.
No.
Because they'd been in a cellar for about 2 years.
Well, Michael had been wearing them. I mean,
and
worse than that.
They virtually walked onto the stage on their own. And he was most put out that nobody wanted to buy them.
Yes. Well, you got auctioned, didn't you? I wouldn't dare put myself up for auction because nobody buy me.
Well,
I put him up for auction.
Yeah,
yes.
I never put myself up for auction.
I wouldn't. Oh, dear.
Other people who shall be nameless, but will afterwards do it for you.
Oh, I don't know what I'd do if I got put up for auction.
Well,
the next plane home,
for you. I'd bid a quarter.
Yes, but what would you get?
Trying to steer this conversation back to a somewhat sensible level, I suppose.
Sorry.
Right.
We were talking about stunts
Wasn't it
earlier.
my contract? Wasn't it your contract?
No, I haven't got a contract.
Oh, haven't you?
Yeah,
Oh, dear.
yeah.
Oh, dear. Oh, it must be like Blake something again, isn't it?
We were talking about stunts earlier. I would think that you got to know some of the stunt coordinators on the show quite well because they had a sort of regular stable of people that would come in, people like Frank Mayer, Stuart Fell, and so forth. What sort of stories do you remember about working with some of these?
Stuart Fell, Oxfordshire. One night, and Stuart Fell is a member of the inner circle of magicians. And one night he sat down, were you up there? He started doing all these magic tricks. They were absolutely wonderful. And everybody was crying, "Go on, more." And he was getting fairly tired, and we were up early in the morning. He said, all right, I'll do one more trick. And he stood then. Stuart Fell's a little man. He's about 5'6", 5'7", I suppose. And he stood there, and he got 2 lengths of what looked like pyjama cord, I suppose about 18 inches. And he stood there, and he held up one in each hand. He said, there are 2 lengths of pyjama cord. And he cleared the space behind him. He did a standing backward somersault, and when he landed, there was a knot in each piece of rope. That's what I remember about Stuart Fell. That was extraordinary. Were you not there?
No, I wasn't there for that.
Oh, wonderful,
No.
that.
I remember Terry Forrestal. Terry used to be the PT instructor for the parachute regiment, which they're pretty hard boys. And we were on location near Swanage, but 12 miles from the hotel. We'd had a very hard day's work. And I said to Terry, look, I tell you what, I'll drive you back to the hotel. And he said, no, but you could take my bag if you would. And I said, why, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to run back. Now, we'd been up since 6 in the morning, filming, doing stunts and things. This guy ran 12 miles back to the hotel.
I remember another occasion with Frank Mayer, who I got very good friends with. Frank was an extraordinary man. He'd been I don't know whether one's allowed to say this, he's certainly been a commando anyway in the Marines and various other things, which he didn't talk about much. But he had one of those extraordinary facilities. We were filming down in, I think it was somewhere near Swanage again or somewhere. And again, I'd arrived late from studio or something for the next day's filming. And there was a bus driver who was sitting in the bar when I arrived at 1 o'clock in the morning with Frank. And Frank was sitting there. And Frank had very pale blue eyes and a very good-looking man, actually. And Frank and I started talking, and this bus driver had obviously had quite a few drinks and was getting very, very stroppy, very stroppy. Kept on saying, "Star, you call yourself Star," and all this. And I was trying to ignore him. And Frank suddenly did something which I've only once seen in my life before, and it's very, very, very frightening. And I don't think something you can do normally. His eyes just went completely and utterly dead, and he looked across this fellow and said, "Out." That's all he said. And this chap who'd been very stroppy just took one look at Frank and said, yeah, okay, mate, just having a chat," and went. And that scared the blazes out of me. His eyes just went completely dead. The only other time I've seen that was with a boxer's minder, and he had completely dead eyes. And oh, shivery, very shivery.
If you went into a bar with the stunt men, I did once in a very crowded bar with a lot of youths, and I had a stunt man on either side of me, and it was like the parting of the Red Sea. They didn't have to say anything, they just walked. I felt wonderful.
Yes.
And I walked up to the bar and bought the drinks, and they said, "Look, Paul, don't you try that," because it won't work.
No, I remember Paul saying once to me, "Don't worry, I'm right behind you by about 7 feet."
More.
Would that sort of pressure, though, to actually know the stunt people sort of push you a bit into doing your own stunts, or were you more than happy to let these guys do their own work and stay back as far as possible?
Sensibly, you stay back. I always wanted to do my own stunts, not so much always just in Blake 7, but in any program I always want to do my own stunts. The problem with it, which one tends to forget, you say, "Yeah, I can do that, falling onto a load of boxes, fine, no problem." But you tend to forget, if something goes wrong, the whole series is kaput. And that's what they're worried about. Not you as an individual, they couldn't give a monkeys about that. But if you do something damaging, you've wrecked the series. And that's why you can't do it yourself. We did do one or two little ones, really, but no. And you see too many actors